The dining room burned with candlelight, shadows stretching long against the panelled walls. 12 men sat in polished chairs, laughter spilling louder than the clink of their silver forks. Meat steamed on porcelain, seasoned with cloves and heavy spice. Beneath the sweetness lingered something else, copper, sharp, metallic. A knock rattled the door. Laughter faltered. Silence crept in. One overseer reached for his goblet, hand trembling. He coughed once, then again, red streaking his lips. The others froze. The narrator's voice cut through the stillness. It was here, on this night, that the taste of power turned to ash. The night gave way to dawn, and Lexington stirred under a veil of mist. The plantation's fields stretched wide, rows of tobacco glistening with dew like 1,000 watchful eyes. Chains rattled before the roosters crowed, their metal cry heavier than any birdsong. The narrator's voice whispered over the rhythm of footsteps in mud. In Lexington, wealth sat on white linen. But in the cabins, hunger was a god with iron teeth. Horses shifted in the stables, their breath rising in soft clouds. A boy stood among them, his shoulders narrow, his eyes downcast. Elias Finch, barely 12, held the reins too tightly, his knuckles pale. He spoke softly to the mare, though his words trembled. "Easy now, don't spook, not today." A whip cracked in the distance. Elias flinched but did not turn. He had learned to keep his gaze fixed on the ground. For eyes, wandering meant questions, and questions brought the lash. From the laundry line strung between crooked posts, a woman's voice rose. It was not a hymn nor a song of joy. It was soft, broken, a lullaby without rest. Ruthie, the washerwoman, bent over a basin, her arms red from cold water. Her voice cracked, but she carried the tune like one carries grief. "Hush, child, hush. The fire won't find you here." Elias listened, though he dared not look at her. Everyone listened. The melody drifted through the quarters, threading itself between walls of wood and smoke, filling empty stomachs and aching bones. 2 men dragging a wagon of cured tobacco sneered as they passed. "Singin' again," one muttered. "Best, keep her throat for washin', not weepin'." Ruthie did not stop. She only wrung the cloth harder, her knuckles white, her song sharper, louder. The narrator broke in, low and unyielding. On the porch, masters sipped coffee from porcelain. In the stables, boys drank rainwater from their cupped hands. 2 worlds divided by linen and iron. Elias tied the reins, his heart drumming fast. The mare nudged his shoulder and he whispered, "Wish I was you. Nothing but grass and sky." "For you?" The horse exhaled, warm breath brushing his cheek, a mercy in a world starved of kindness. Across the yard, the big house loomed, its windows catching the sun like sharp teeth. Servants hurried in and out, carrying trays of bread, pitchers of milk. The air smelled of roasted ham. Elias's stomach twisted. He dared glance at Ruthie. She caught his eye just for a second, and in her gaze was a warning. Stay small, stay silent. Then she returned to her song, the lullaby rising like smoke over a fire. The day had begun, and with it, the endless cycle. Fields to till, bodies to break, laughter to echo from the house while hunger gnawed the cabins. The narrator closed the scene with a chill. Here, silence was survival. And every whisper, every song carried the weight of chains. The kitchen of the big house never slept. Even before the sun lit the windows, the hearth burned, smoke curling into the rafters like dark fingers. The air was thick with grease, spice, and sweat. For Sarah, a girl no older than 9, it was the center of her world. She stood barefoot on a stool, hands dusted with flour, watching her mother's fingers move with quiet mastery. Martha hummed as she kneaded dough, her voice low, a lullaby that wrapped around her child as surely as arms might. "Hush, little sparrow," she sang, "the wind won't take you yet." Sarah pressed her palms into the dough, clumsy but eager. "Will they like it?" she asked. Martha's hand stilled. She looked at her daughter, eyes tired, but still holding fire. "They always like it," she said. "That's why they eat, while we go hungry." The girl's brow furrowed. "Why can't we eat the bread too?" Martha glanced toward the open doorway, listening for boots, for the sharp edge of a voice. Then she whispered, "Because, Sarah, the bread ain't ours, Not the bread, not the pot, not the fire that cooks it. All of it belongs to them. The iron pot hanging over the flames hissed as fat dripped into it. Sarah leaned close, mesmerized by the sound. "But it's us that makes it," she said softly. Her mother only nodded. From the far end of the kitchen, a man's laugh thundered. Thomas Calhoun, the overseer, leaned against the wall, a flask in his hand. His coat hung loose, his boots muddy, and his breath stank of whiskey. His whip dangled at his side, coiled like a waiting snake. "Girl talks too much," he drawled, pointing with the flask. "Best keep her quiet, Martha, or the lash'll do it." Sarah froze. Martha put a hand on her daughter's shoulder, firm, steady. "She's learning the work," she said. "That's all." Calhoun took a swig, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and grinned. "Work, eh? Good, don't forget her place." He pushed off the wall and strode out, boots heavy against the wood. The sound lingered long after he was gone. Sarah's small voice broke the silence. "Mama, he scares me." Martha pulled her close, pressing Sarah's flower-streaked cheek against her apron. "He scares everyone," she murmured. "But he can't touch your spirit, not if you hold it tight." That night, the kitchen filled with the smell of rosemary bread. Sarah's stomach growled as she set the loaves on silver trays. She watched through the crack of the door as the masters laughed around their table, tearing into the warm bread. Butter dripping from their fingers. Her mother stood behind her, whispering, "Remember this smell, child. Remember it deep. It'll follow you longer than chains." Sarah closed her eyes, breathing in the mingled scents of bread and smoke, hunger and silence. The next day, hunger pushed another child too far. A boy, no, older than Elias Finch, ribs sharp beneath his skin, slipped into the kitchen when Martha's back was turned. His hands shook as he reached for a crust left cooling on the windowsill. But Calhoun was quicker. The overseer stormed in, catching the boy by the wrist. The bread tumbled to the floor. "Well, well," Calhoun sneered, whiskey dripping from his words. "A little thief." The boy's eyes widened. "I was hungry." The crack of leather cut his plea short. Calhoun's whip lashed across his back, the sound louder than the boy's cry. Sarah flinched, her small fists clenched tight. "Stop it!" she cried before she could think. Calhoun's head snapped toward her, eyes burning. He took one step, then another. Martha stepped between them, shielding her daughter with her body. "Enough!" Martha's voice shook, but did not break. "She's just a child," Calhoun smirked. "Then she'll learn early." But he turned back to the boy, dragging him by the collar and shoving him toward the yard. The whip whistled again, followed by another scream. Sarah buried her face in her mother's skirt. "Why do they do it?" Martha stroked her hair, her hands trembling. "Because they think we're nothing. But remember, child, nothing can be turned into something even scraps can feed." The iron pot bubbled on the hearth, its black surface gleaming in the firelight. Sarah stared at it, her reflection warped and shimmering. She felt the weight of it, as though it held not just food but secrets, power, the possibility of something greater. That night, as the lullaby drifted once more from her mother's lips, Sarah lay awake on the straw pallet, her stomach empty but her mind full. She thought of bread and chains, of laughter and screams, of the iron pot and the smell of rosemary, and though she did not yet know it, those memories would harden inside, her shaping a future the masters could never imagine. The river at dusk shimmered like liquid fire, reflecting the red of a sinking sun. Sarah crouched on its bank, her toes skimming the cool current, her breath caught between longing and fear. Beside her, a boy leaned against a tree, his shirt ragged, his back marred with scars that crossed like rivers carved in flesh. Jonah. He plucked a reed of grass and chewed it, eyes fixed on the horizon. "One day," he whispered, "I'll take a raft down this river, ride it all the way to freedom." Sarah's voice was soft. "And then what?" He smiled, though it was weary. "Then I'll eat till I'm full, sleep till I'm rested, find a place where no man holds a whip." Sarah dipped her fingers into the water, watching the ripples spread. "Take me with you." Jonah turned, studying her face. "You'd come," she nodded without hesitation. "I'd scrub pots or cook or sew, anything but stay here." For a moment the dream was real, two children daring to imagine a life beyond chains. Then the sound of distant boots shattered it, and both froze, breath caught like hunted animals. When no lash followed, they exhaled, their dream retreating back into silence. Days later, in the parlor of the big house, another kind of secret bloomed. Sarah carried a tray of tea to the young mistress, Abigail Turner. Abigail was no older than 17, her hair pinned high, her fingers stained with ink. "Leave it there," Abigail said, her tone sharper than her eyes. When the others left the room, her voice softened. "Come here, Sarah." The girl hesitated, glancing toward the hall. "If anyone sees, they won't." Abigail pulled a folded scrap of paper from her pocket, pressing it into Sarah's palm. The edges were smudged, the ink uneven. "Look." On the paper was a single letter, S curved like a river. Sarah traced it with her finger. "What is it?" "It's the start of your name," Abigail whispered. "S for Sarah." Sarah's eyes widened. "You'd teach me." Abigail smiled, faintly, but only when no one's watching, and so the lessons began. Scraps of paper slipped into Sarah's apron, chalk marks scrawled in ashes by the hearth. Abigail guiding her hand, whispering letters like secrets. A-R-H. "Your name is a weapon," Abigail said one night as candlelight flickered between them. "If you can write it, you cannot be erased." Sarah felt power stir inside her, fragile but fierce. For the first time, she held a piece of herself no master could own, but secrets on plantations never stayed buried. One afternoon, Thomas Calhoun stumbled into the kitchen, whiskey heavy on his breath. He leaned in the doorway, squinting at the chalkboard where Sarah had scrawled crooked letters under Abigail's hand. "What's this?" he barked. Abigail froze, then forced a laugh. "Just a game. Teaching her to mark flour sacks, that's all." Calhoun's eyes narrowed. He stepped, close so near Sarah could smell the sour sting of liquor. A nigger don't need letters, only chains. Sarah's hand trembled, chalk breaking in her grip. Abigail, voice steady, said, "It's harmless." Calhoun stared at Sarah for a long, dangerous moment. Then he spat on the floor and turned away. "Best keep it harmless, or I'll cut the learning out of her back." His boots thudded down the hall, the sound like a drumbeat of warning. Sarah's chest heaved, but Abigail placed a hand over hers. "Don't stop," she whispered. "Fear is what they want, don't give it." Sarah nodded, though her stomach twisted. In the distance, a whip cracked, and Jonah's cry carried faintly across the yard. That night, Sarah sat by the iron pot, its surface reflecting firelight. She thought of Jonah's dream of escape, of Abigail's forbidden gift of letters. She thought of Calhoun's eyes, dark and watching. She whispered to herself, "S-I-F-A-T-T-T-T." The name lingered in the air like smoke, fragile but unbroken, and deep inside, beneath fear and hunger, a seed of defiance took root. The summer heat pressed down heavy on the plantation, turning the fields into furnaces and the cabins into ovens. The smell of sweat and dust clung to the air. Inside the kitchen, Martha's hands worked quickly, slipping a biscuit into her apron pocket when no one watched. Her eyes flicked to Sarah, thin, hungry, lips cracked. "Here," she whispered, pressing the bread into her daughter's palm. "Eat fast." Sarah bit into it, the butter melting against her tongue, but the taste was cut short by a shadow filling the doorway. Thomas Calhoun stood there, whip coiled in one hand, his whiskey bottle in the other. His grin showed more malice than teeth. "Well, well," he drawled. "Stealing from the master's table, are we?" Martha's shoulders stiffened. "It's just a scrap. Nothing that'll be missed." Calhoun's eyes gleamed. "Every crumb's his, every drop, every breath." He yanked her by the arm. Sarah cried out, "Leave her be." But the overseer's whip cracked before the words left her lips. Martha staggered, the lash tearing across her back. "Please," Martha gasped, but Calhoun struck again. The iron pot hissed in the silence between blows, as though the kitchen itself bore witness. Sarah lunged forward, but Calhoun shoved her aside. "Watch close, girl," he spat. "Learn what happens when you forget your place." Martha collapsed against the hearth, her breath ragged. The overseer gave one last strike before tossing the whip aside and staggering out, his boots echoing down the hall. Sarah fell to her knees beside her mother, hands trembling as she tried to stop the bleeding. "Mama, hold on. Please, hold on." Martha's eyes, clouded with pain, fixed on her daughter's face. She reached for Sarah's hand, pressing it weakly. "Listen to me, child," she whispered, her voice a broken thread. "Don't let them eat your soul." Tears streaked Sarah's cheeks. "Don't leave me." Martha's lips curved in the faintest smile, then stilled. Her chest rose once more, then no more. The kitchen was silent save for the bubbling pot. Sarah sat frozen, rocking her mother's body, the lullaby Martha once sang echoing faintly in her mind. From the hall came a different voice, smooth, commanding. Master Henry Whitlock entered, his boots polished, his coat clean despite the heat. He surveyed the scene with cold detachment, his ledger tucked beneath his arm. "What happened here?" he asked. Sarah looked up, her eyes blazing. "He killed her." Whitlock's gaze flicked to Martha's still form, then back to Sarah. He sighed as though calculating the loss of labor. "A shame," he said flatly. "She was a capable cook, but replacements can be bought." Sarah's stomach turned. The master's words weighed heavier than Calhoun's whip, her mother's life reduced to ink on a page. Whitlock closed the ledger with a snap. "Clean this up," he ordered, and left without another glance. Sarah sat in the quiet rage burning, where grief once hollowed her. She turned toward the knives gleaming on the counter, their blades catching the firelight. She stared at the iron pot, its black surface reflecting her face, warped, shadowed, unrecognizable. Her voice, low and steady, cut through the silence. "They eat from me." Her fingers tightened on the knife handle. "Then they eat of me." The pot hissed, the fire crackled, and for the first time Sarah felt the weight of vengeance take shape in her bones. The days after Martha's death fell heavy as ash. Sarah moved through the kitchen with silence sharpened into steel. She stirred pots, kneaded bread, roasted meat, but every movement carried a shadow. She no longer hummed her mother's lullabies. She carried them inside, buried deep, waiting. By night she slipped from the quarters, bare feet pressing into the damp earth of the fields. She gathered sprigs of rosemary, her mother's herb of memory, and tucked them into her apron. But, alongside it, she learned to pluck leaves of hemlock, pale and bitter. To one hand, memory. To the other, death. Old Moses found her one night by the riverbank, crouched with her herbs. His beard was white, his back bent, but his eyes carried a fire that had outlived chains. He carried a cane carved with strange patterns, symbols whispered, from a homeland Sarah had never seen. "You're dabbling with shadows, girl," he said, his voice gravel and smoke. Sarah didn't look up. "I ain't afraid of shadows." Moses lowered himself onto a rock, groaning at the weight of his bones. "Shadows can swallow whole if you don't walk 'em right." He tapped his cane on the ground. "But I see the fire in you. Same fire your mama had." Sarah's eyes glistened in the moonlight. "She's gone, they took her from me." Moses nodded slowly. "Then you'll take something back. But vengeance is a hungry beast. Once you feed it, it don't stop." Sarah's voice hardened. "Let it eat." The old man studied her for a long time, then began to hum, low and steady. He traced symbols in the dirt, circles, flames, chains broken in half. "These are the signs," he whispered. "Blood for blood, fire for fire." Sarah traced them too, her fingers trembling at first, then steady. Together they chanted words older than the land, words that carried both weight and warning. In the kitchen, Rebecca noticed the change. She was younger than Martha had been, her hands always trembling, her eyes darting like a sparrow's. She caught Sarah slipping bones into a sack one evening after a meal had been cleared. "What are you doing?" Rebecca hissed. Sarah met, her gaze. "Keeping them for later." Rebecca shook her head. "You'll hang if they catch you." "Then help me," Sarah said. Fear flickered across Rebecca's face, but she nodded. That night she helped grind herbs, her hands shaking as she mixed rosemary with darker leaves. The first near catch came when Calhoun stormed into the kitchen, reeking of liquor, his whip dragging across the floor. Sarah was at the table, a slip of paper in her hand. Abigail's letters, blood from a nicked finger staining the corner. "What's that?" Calhoun barked. Sarah shoved the paper beneath a bowl. "Recipe," she said flatly. Calhoun narrowed his eyes, stepping closer, his breath hot with whiskey. He flipped the bowl, the slip nearly caught, but Rebecca stumbled forward, knocking a jug from the counter. It shattered, milk spilling across the floor. Calhoun cursed, the distraction pulling him away. He lashed Rebecca across the arm, sneering, "Clumsy fool." Then he staggered out, leaving Sarah clutching the stained paper against her chest. Rebecca's arm bled, but she whispered through clenched teeth, "He didn't see." Sarah pressed a strip of cloth to the wound, her jaw tight. "He won't. Not till it's too late." Weeks later, another close call. Sarah had hidden scraps of bones behind the hearth, polishing them clean, preparing them for her plan. But as Rebecca carried wood for the fire, one bundle slipped. The bones clattered onto the stone floor, echoing loud as a bell. Both froze. Footsteps approached. Sarah lunged forward, scooping the bones back into the sack, sliding them beneath. The ashes just as the door opened. A man entered, not Calhoun this time, but Silas Moore, a merchant from town. His eyes were sharp, his smile oily. He sniffed the air. "Smells rich in here." Sarah bowed her head, hiding her face. "Just stew, sir." Moore stepped closer, his gaze flicking to the hearth, to the ashes. He lingered a moment too long, then smirked. "Keep it that way." When he left, Rebecca exhaled hard, clutching her chest. He saw something. Sarah shook her head. "He saw what I wanted him to see." Nights grew longer. Sarah and Moses whispered rituals by firelight. Rebecca gathered bones, herbs, scraps of parchment. Sarah altered her recipes, lines of ink blotted with drops of blood, the letters twisting into something unholy. The iron pot simmered endlessly, its black walls absorbing each secret, each vow. The narrator's voice cut through the smoke. Every dish carried memory, every herb a warning, every bone a promise. Step by step, Sarah stitched her vengeance into silence, and in that silence, a storm gathered, waiting to break. The dining room glowed like an altar of false gods. 12 men sat at the long table, their voices thick with laughter, their rings glinting in candlelight. Silver forks scraped against porcelain plates. The room smelled of roasted meat and spiced wine, warm bread and smoke. Sarah moved between them in silence, her hands steady, her face unreadable. Every dish she carried came from the great iron pot, blackened, ancient, the one her mother had tended with lullabies. But tonight, the songs were gone. Tonight, the pot boiled with something. "Elsa," Henry Whitlock at the head of the table raised his glass. His smile was smooth, a mask carved from ice. "To prosperity," he declared, "to the land, the harvest, and the strength of men who know their worth." The men echoed, their voices booming. "To prosperity." Sarah lowered her gaze and placed a bowl before him. Stew thick and dark, steam rising, the herbs masking what lay beneath. Jonah stood near the doorway, his scarred hands clenched. He had begged Sarah earlier to stop, to find another path. But her eyes had burned with something untouchable. Now he watched her move among the masters like a ghost, his chest tight, his heart torn between horror and loyalty. One of the overseers, Calhoun, leather whip hanging by his chair, stabbed his fork into the meat, lifted it, let the juices drip back into the bowl. He sniffed it once, then shoved it into his mouth, his eyes closed. "Rich," he muttered. "By God, rich." Others followed, chewing, swallowing, praising. "Never tasted the like," one said. "Seasoned just right," another laughed. Their voices overlapped, greedy and blind. Sarah stood still. Her hands did not tremble, her eyes did not waver. Inside, her mother's dying words echoed, "Don't let them eat your soul." No, they would eat what she chose to give. Whitlock lifted a spoonful, studied it. "Different tonight," he remarked. His voice was calm, curious. He tasted, let it roll over his tongue. Full-bodied, almost smoky. He glanced at Sarah. "What did you add?" "Just memory," she said softly. He frowned. "What?" But the room had erupted with chatter again, the men filling their bellies with the forbidden meal, laughing louder, drunker. In the corner, Abigail Turner slipped in. Her silk dress rustled against the wood, her face pale in the glow. She had come to deliver notes for her father, but the scent drew her toward the table. She picked up a spoon, reaching for a bowl. Sarah saw time slowed. The chains of every slave on the plantation seemed to rattle beneath the floor. The fire in the hearth hissed and cracked. Sarah's breath caught. She crossed the room in 2 strides and seized Abigail's wrist. Hard, firm, their eyes locked. Abigail whispered, "Sarah, what's wrong?" Sarah shook her head, voice low as steel. "Not you, never you." She pushed the spoon away, setting it back with finality. Abigail, confused, stepped back, her eyes wide. Jonah saw everything. The mercy buried inside vengeance, the line Sarah refused to cross. He pressed his forehead against the wall, torn apart by the weight of it. Then came the knock, a sharp, deliberate rapping at the door. The laughter dimmed. Fawkes paused. Whitlock gestured and Calhoun staggered to answer. The door creaked open, revealing Sheriff Alcott. His coat was long, his boots muddied, his eyes sharp as blades. He stepped inside, removing his hat slowly. "Evening," he drawled. "Smells fine in here." Whitlock smiled with polite disdain. "Sheriff, to what do we owe this intrusion?" Alcott's gaze swept the table, lingered on the bowls, then on Sarah. He narrowed his eyes, heard whispers, folks in town talking about strange things from this place. "Thought I'd see for myself." Whitlock's voice hardened. "You accuse me?" Alcott raised a hand. "Just asking questions." He leaned closer to the table, sniffed the stew. His nostrils flared, his jaw tightened. Sarah stood frozen, every heartbeat echoing like thunder. Calhoun, eager to mock, shoved a spoonful toward the sheriff. "Taste it. Finest stew in Kentucky." Alcott's lips curled into something like a smile. He dipped the spoon, lifted it halfway, then paused, studying Sarah again. Her face betrayed nothing, but her eyes, dark and burning, gave him pause. Slowly he set the spoon down. "Not tonight," he said. Whitlock sneered. "Superstition, Sheriff?" "Instinct," Alcott muttered. The men returned to their eating, laughter swelling once more. Calhoun coughed suddenly, a dry rasp that cut the noise. He waved it off, reached for his cup, drank deep. His face flushed, then paled. A drop of blood stained his lip. Silence fell. Fawkes stopped. "Just choked," he muttered hoarsely, wiping his mouth, but his hand trembled. Sarah watched. Her chest rose steady, steady, steady. Whitlock turned his gaze back to her. Suspicion flickered, faint but growing. She met his eyes for the first time that night. No fear, no plea, only fire. The narrator's voice slipped in, low and final. In the flicker of firelight, they tasted death and called it rich. In the rattle of unseen chains, they swallowed memory made flesh. And Sarah, once voiceless, stood as judge, jury, and silent executioner. The chains rattled louder beneath the table, the fire cracked higher in the hearth, and the night thickened with secrets no wine could wash away. The sickness came slow, like rot crawling under wood. First Calhoun. His cough deepened, each fit, spraying red onto his kerchief. Then another overseer doubled over in the fields, his belly twisted with pain. The laughter of that night drained from their throats and left only fear. Whitlock rode the grounds like a storm, his boots striking. Hard, his eyes wild, he barked at the doctors, cursed the slaves, and blamed the weather, but whispers moved faster than his denial. "They're cursed," one master muttered, clutching his gut. "It's the food," another spat, glaring toward the kitchens. Sarah kept her silence. She stirred her pots, laid out bread, poured wine. Her face gave nothing, her hands moved with calm precision. Only in her eyes embers smoldered. In the quarters, the enslaved gathered in hushed knots. Elias Finch, the stable boy, spoke with awe. She walked in with fire in her hands. Ruthie, the washerwoman, wept as she rocked a baby, humming the lullaby once sung by Martha. But now the notes bent darker. No cradle song, but a warning. "Hush now, child. Don't you weep. Shadows eat what masters keep." The lullaby spread like smoke, twisted by fear and hope both. Whitlock summoned Sarah one night. She entered his study, the walls lined with ledgers and maps, every object measured, every life accounted for in ink. He poured whiskey, his hand shaking just slightly. He studied her with icy eyes. "My men are dying," he said. "And I think it comes from your kitchen." Sarah bowed her head. "I serve what you ask, master." His voice hardened. "Speak." "Plain, did you poison them?" Silence. Only the crackle of the fire answered. Whitlock slammed his glass against the table. "You belong to me. If you're guilty, I'll see you broken slow." Sarah lifted her gaze, meeting his eyes without fear. For the first time, his breath caught. There was no submission in her, only something he could not name, something that looked like judgment. The law soon entered. Sheriff Alcott returned, suspicion sharpened into certainty. He walked the kitchen, sniffed the iron pot, and scribbled notes in his little leather book. Silas Moore, the merchant, stood nearby, smirking. "Told you she was hiding things. Saw bones where no bones ought to be." Sarah said nothing. She dried her hands on her apron, steady as stone. The trial was held in the Lexington courthouse, where white pillars rose high and the air reeked of sweat and tobacco. The benches filled with townsfolk hungry for spectacle. Judge Harper presided, old, his hands trembling, his wig tilted slightly askew. He looked not like justice, but like a man too tired to seek it. Mary Beth, Whitlock's daughter, clung to a wooden doll in the front row. Her wide eyes watched Sarah with innocent confusion. The first witness, Silas Moore. He bowed low, his voice oily. "I seen her, Judge. Hide in bones. Saw the way she guarded that pot. Ain't natural." Murmurs rose. Next, Elias Finch. His voice, cracked, timid, yet his words carried weight. I heard the songs change. Used to be soft like her mama sang. Now's they chill your bones, she ain't the same." The crowd shifted uneasily. Jonah was called last. His scars caught the candlelight as he stood, his voice rough with desperation. "She never raised no hand but to cook. She never sought harm till harm came to her. You sit here talking of poison while forgetting the whip that split her mama's back. If she struck, it's 'cause you struck first." Gasps. The gavel slammed. Judge Harper's voice quavered. "Order." Whitlock glared at Jonah like a blade drawn. "Loyalty blinds him," he spat. "Her guilt is plain." Throughout it all, Sarah spoke not a word. She sat tall, her eyes forward. Only once did she open her lips, and it was not for the court. She hummed, the lullaby her mother sang, low, steady, unbroken. The sound slithered through the chamber, soft as smoke, sharp as a knife. The mothers in the crowd clutched their children tighter. The men shifted, uneasy. Judge Harper cleared his throat, but the melody clung to the rafters. It was no longer a cradle song. It was a dirge. When the verdict came, Harper's voice shook. "Guilty, the sentence is death by hanging." Silence pressed heavy. Mary Beth whimpered, burying her face into her doll's hair. Jonah shouted, lunging forward, "No, you damn cowards! She only gave back what you fed her, chains and fire." Guards seized him, dragging him down, his cries echoing. Sarah did not move. Her eyes held steady, her face calm as stone. She hummed again, softer now, almost tender, as though singing to the ghost of her mother. The narrator's voice returned, cold and final. They tried her not for the crimes of flesh, but for daring, to hold a mirror to power. In the silence of her song, the court found terror, and in their terror they wrote her death. The gavel fell. The chain was set. The rope was waiting. The rope broke her breath at dawn. The crowd gathered, some with folded arms, others with hidden pity. Sarah's body swayed against the pale Kentucky sky, a silhouette carved into memory. But death was not the end. Death was the seed. In the weeks after, the fields whispered. Ruthie's lullaby bent darker, passed from mother to child in the cabins. "Hush now, child, don't you weep. Shadows eat what masters keep." Children learned the rhyme before they learned their letters. Overseers shuddered when the song drifted across the night air, for it was no longer a lullaby, but a warning. Elias Finch, now grown older, swore he saw her shadow in the kitchen fire some nights, iron pot glowing red though no flame licked it. "She's still cooking," he muttered, voice low. "Still feeding them one by one." A preacher came through Lexington years later, voice booming from the pulpit. He told the tale not as justice, but as caution. "They say a woman poisoned her betters," he thundered. "She fed them their own sins, stewed and salted. And what came of it? Rope and damnation. Let this be a warning against rebellion, against the devil's whisper in your ear." His words struck fear into some, but others heard something else. A seed of defiance buried beneath the sermon. Time blurred the facts. The iron pot became a cauldron of fire. The herbs became spells whispered in a tongue long forgotten. Some swore Sarah's eyes burned red that last night, glowing like coals. Children dared each other to walk past the Whitlock plantation after dark. They said if you pressed your ear against the kitchen wall, you'd hear the scrape of forks, the low hum of a lullaby that wasn't meant for sleep. Decades later, an old woman sat by the fire, her hands twisted with age, her voice thin as thread. She was one of the last who remembered the girl herself, not the legend but the living. "I saw her," she whispered to her grandchildren, "not the rope, not the court. I saw her in the kitchen, firelight on her face, eyes steady as the world burned around her. She didn't flinch, she didn't beg. She held something inside, something too big for chains." Her grandchildren leaned close, wide-eyed. What was it? The old woman smiled sadly. It was freedom, and freedom scares men more than poison. From preacher's pulpit to cabin fire, from courtroom whispers to ghost stories in the dark, Sarah's tale drifted, reshaped with each telling. For some, she was a demon, a warning of what comes when the order is broken. For others, she was a saint, the cook who turned cruelty into vengeance, who fed her masters the taste of their own sins. But in every version, the iron pot remained. The lullaby lingered, the fire never went out. The narrator's voice lingered low, almost reverent. Names fade, ledgers rot, but some stories cling like smoke to rafters, like blood to iron. Sarah of Lexington, slave, cook, poisoner, martyr, monster. They tried to bury her in silence. Instead, they fed a legend, and in the legend, the fire still burned. Chains rust, bones rot, but memory does not. Sarah's story is not etched in stone or carved into courthouse records. It lives, in breath, in whispers, in songs that mothers murmur when the night grows heavy. It lives in the fear that passed through the master's dining hall when they tasted something they could not name. Justice was never offered to her. The court spoke of property, not of people. They saw her hands only as tools, her silence as obedience, her body as something owned. But in the end, she took back the only power left to her, the intimacy of food, that most ordinary act. Bread shared, stew simmered, wine poured. What could be more human? And yet, Sarah twisted it into something unholy, making each bite a mirror of cruelty. Her vengeance was not a battlefield, not a gunshot. It was a spoon, a fork, a smile across a candlelit table. Some say she was a monster, turning flesh into feast. Others say she was a prophet, forcing her oppressors to taste the truth. But perhaps she was only human, broken, cornered, carrying her mother's lullaby in one hand and a pot of memory in the other. And so the question remains, was her silence at the trial guilt or defiance? Was her song a farewell or a curse? The narrator's voice lingers. Chains fall, fire dies, but stories endure. And in the story of Sarah of Lexington, vengeance and justice lie so close together, they taste the same on the tongue. If you lived in Sarah's chains, would you forgive or would you serve them their own sins? It is easy from the distance of centuries to pass judgment. Easy to say vengeance is evil, easy to call her monstrous. But imagine the whip's crack in your ears. Imagine hunger gnawing your bones while others feast in front of you. Imagine your mother's blood staining the ground, her lullaby cut short. What then would justice mean to you? Would it look like patience? Or would it look like fire in a pot spooned out with a steady hand? Sarah of Lexington forces us to confront the darkest edge of humanity, the point where survival becomes rebellion, and rebellion becomes horror. She turned their table into her battlefield. She turned food into a weapon. And long after the rope silenced her, her story still feeds us questions no verdict can answer. So I'll ask you again, if you lived in her chains, what would you choose? If this story unsettled you, if it opened a corner of history you've never seen before, subscribe, like, and share. There are more hidden histories waiting, more shadows that need light, and more voices, long buried, that still refuse to be silent.